Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the HA Bionet Seminar Series. My name is Barbra Abel-Chauke. I'm a training and outreach coordinator for HA Bionet, based in Cape Town at UCT, South Africa. And myself and the HA Bionet Seminar coordinators, as well as the task force, are excited that you can join us for the January 2019 seminar titled Intellectual Property and Copyrights for Academics. How the seminar format will go, or rather how this talk will go, is that Thomas King will provide a talk for about 30 to 40 minutes. So this exciting talk will be for about 40 minutes, and you'll have 10 to 15 minutes of discussion and Q&A at the end. Thomas King currently works for the Center of Innovation in Learning and Teaching, CILT, at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Now, just a quick snapshot or excerpt of what this is about is that intellectual property and copyright for academics is a very timely access to information, which is crucial in improving health outcomes and socio-political and economic dev, particularly as the world is increasingly moving towards the so-called knowledge economy. Now, to introduce a speaker, who I don't want to obviously put words in his mouth, and I'm not going to give you everything about what he's going to say. He's going to speak for himself. Thomas King is a learning designer based in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, CILT, working on the formal online education project, which seeks to assist UCT lecturers interested in taking part of their teaching online. Previously, he has worked as a data curation officer in the Digital Library Services Unit in UCT Libraries, as well as the project curator for the Research in Open Educational Resources for the Development Program, the student coordinator for the Vice Chancellor's Open Educational Resources Adaptation Project, and as a research assistant for the Scholarly Communication and African Program. His primary research interests revolve around open educational resources, or OER, and open data, particularly in the fields of qualitative de-identification and management. He holds a master's in education, focusing on open educational resources, production and adaptation by postgraduate students at the University of Cape Town. I mean, that was a mouthful. He's done so much. And without further ado, please help me in welcoming Thomas King, who's the speaker for today. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Thomas King speaking. Right, today's seminar is going to be covering a variety of topics in intellectual property and copyright, specifically from an academic perspective. We'll be covering what is copyright, some alternatives to full copyright, and how researchers, students, and research institutions can use certain kinds of online tools and platforms to share their work most openly. All of these topics by themselves are massive, can be very complicated, can be very extensive. So this will really be a quick introduction to these various topics. Now, those are the topics we'll be covering. So it's IP and copyright, open licensing and Creative Commons, and open publishing. Not patenting and not trademarks. These are areas I do not have knowledge in and I should not be speaking about. And before we go any further, I would just like to make a disclaimer, and that is that I am not a copyright lawyer, as in I am not licensed to practice law in any capacity, and my advice does not constitute legal counsel. Now, why I say that is because the person who originally designed this presentation and the core work, that's Shiham Sheikh, she's on the front cover, was very clear as a copyright lawyer about what we can and can't say in a legal sense. So this is advisory and not legal advice. That being said, I do have a lot of practical experience in academic copyright. I've worked in open access publication projects. I've worked extensively with open educational resources and in open data. So I've covered this copyright and intellectual property angle from a number of different academic perspectives. And I must also say right at the beginning, I'm an advocate for openness in education, particularly in higher education. So I'm not speaking from a completely neutral perspective. I own the fact that I believe that when education is made more open, when data is made more open, and when publications are made more open, this is beneficial for society, it's beneficial for scholarship, And most importantly, it improves the quality of these various things. And we'll get to some of those aspects a little bit later. Okay, so let's talk about copyright. Now on your screen there we have a variety of symbols. In the top left we have the copyright circle. In the top right we have the copyleft circle, which is alternative to copyright. And in the middle we have the Creative Commons logo. I'll be going over at least the 1 and 3 in a moment. So let's start with defining copyright. What is copyright? Copyright is a set of exclusive rights. Exclusive means that if I have these rights, I exclude others from having these rights, in most cases. In some cases, you can share them. They are granted to the author or creator upon creation of a specific piece of work. That specific work can be as granular as an image, or a video, or a book, or a presentation, or a simulation. Any sort of intellectual work can be covered by copyright, but importantly, it covers specific works and not ideas. I'll get back to them in a moment. What are the rights provided by copyright? They are the right to reproduce, to adapt, to distribute or sell, to publish, to perform or broadcast, and the freedom to transfer these rights or to share these rights with others, and to give permission to use the work in a specified manner. Now, I'd like to start at the beginning again. A set of exclusive rights, which means if I have the right to reproduce a piece of work, it means I'm excluding others from reproducing that piece of work, unless I have specifically indicated otherwise. I have transferred those rights or I have shared those rights. If you look at that list, it's actually quite restrictive. What it basically means is if I create something, let's say I create this particular presentation, and someone else finds it, they can do very little with it except look at it. They can't make a copy of it. They can't change it. They can't distribute it. They can't publish it. They can't broadcast it to others, if this is under full copyright. Now there's a differentiation here. When I say copyright and when I say full copyright, copyright is the legal framework that covers intellectual property, whereas full copyright means I have kept all these rights on the page here for myself. It's two slightly different things. Copyright, the legal framework, and full copyright being I am excluding anyone else from using any of these other things. Now, this has some certain implications. Before you can get to that, let's talk about when copyright is assigned. It is automatically assigned upon creation and does not have to be indicated in any way. Right? Something doesn't have to say, this is copyright to X, or have a little copyright stamp on it for it to be copyright. Which means by default, you have to assume that everything you find is under copyright to the author, unless it specifically says otherwise. Okay? Everything is under copyright because it's assigned at the moment of creation. Now, in South Africa, and broadly speaking, across the world, copyright is generally pretty similar in terms of the legal frameworks across countries, but I have most experience with South African copyrights. I'm going to be speaking about that. So in South Africa, it persists for 50 years after the year of the death of the creator, after which that piece of work becomes public domain and falls out of copyright. Very, very crucial piece of information here. Public domain doesn't mean it's on TV, it's on the internet, it has been published. Right? We sometimes use the word public domain meaning it's out there, people can find it. That is not what public domain means in a legal sense. Public domain in the legal sense means that every single person on earth has the full set of rights to that piece of work. An example could be music that was composed in the 1700s, Beethoven or Bach, for example. Their pieces of work are in the public domain. They belong to all of us as common heritage. Anyone can take those things and cut a CD and sell it, or download it to their computer and play it, or play it to friends, or remix it, or whatever they want to do. That is public domain. Things just being on the internet, being available in the world space, are not necessarily in public domain. Very, very crucial distinction. right? The common sense, common language of the word is not the same as the legal language of the word. As mentioned before in the previous slide, copyright owners may transfer their rights, those rights indicated before, or grant individuals permission to use the work in specific ways. In academia, this happens quite frequently when you publish. You publish in many of the journals. The key journals have a copyright transfer agreement in which you transfer your exclusive rights to the publisher, who then takes those rights, usually sharing with them with you. In the past, sometimes they took those rights away fully, which means you couldn't even make copies of your own work. Sounds strange, I know, but technically true. These days, that's not quite as widespread. People generally, publishers rather, generally say, well, if you're the original creator, you can still curate your work in some ways, or you can put it on a website. That varies per publisher, each one of them having their own special kinds of publication agreements. And lastly, in terms of copyright assignation, copyright applies to items, products, or creations, and not ideas. And if you're going back to the beginning, remember I've said I'm not talking about patenting or trademarks, so nothing in this presentation refers to patents or trademarks. That's an area I do not know enough about. But in this sense, copyright applies to objects or artifacts of some sort. So the book in which I put forward my new theory, or the set of works that I publish online, those are copyrighted to me, not the ideas within them. I can't copyright the idea of gravity. I can't copyright the color green. I can't copyright a process. I may be able to patent that process, but that's a different thing. So I can copyright the book in which I publish these ideas, or the journal article, or the presentation, or the simulation, or the visualization, but I can't copyright the idea itself. Now, I'm sure at least some of you may be thinking, this sounds kind of ridiculous in the internet era, and frankly, it is a pre-internet law. So copyright law in general was codified before the rise of the internet in the 70s. In South Africa, the Extant Copyright Act is 1976 or 78, I can't remember off the top of my head. And one of the big things about the internet is the internet makes certain of the rights, we'll go back to to the first slide, for instance, the rights to reproduce and the rights to publish, very, very easy. On computers and on the internet, it is trivial to make a copy of a file, or to take a copy of a file and upload it to the internet, or to a website, or to a repository. Mechanically, the structure of the internet and of digital technology generally makes redistribution incredibly easy. This, however, does clash with a strict definition of copyright. And I want to make a very important point here, is because of how easy the internet makes copying items and sharing items, copyright violations are ubiquitous and almost unavoidable. Ubiquitous meaning they happen all the time. It is kind of simply just a fact of how the internet works, how the internet promotes sharing and copying, that it clashes with the strict definition of copyright, basically by function of its very existence. I'm going to go and show you some examples in a moment. So here are some common copyright violations. If I download a PDF from a journal's website, let's say it's a published website, and let's say I have access to that website through my institution, so I'm legally downloading it, that's fine. But then I upload that article onto another course website. That could well be a violation of copyright, because I have both made a copy and I have published it. I have redistributed it somewhere else. I've broken copyright twice, in fact. This happens all the time. Like I said, the very structure of the internet means that it is very easy, it's almost unconscious to break copyright. There are, of course, legal alternatives to this. Some journals are perfectly happy with people downloading copies and putting them in places. Some journals aren't. But you can always inform students or your colleagues or members of the public where they can go to find the legally uploaded version. So for example, if I find a journal article which is very much in a closed journal, a journal which doesn't share those exclusive rights with any of them, I can say, I found this article on this website. Here's a link to it. If you can go and access it, if your institution pays for access to that resource, then you can go and find it. That is always legal. You can imagine it in the sense of if there's a bookstore. Going out into the bookstore, taking out the book and giving it to someone else is illegal. But telling people, passers-by, that the book's in there, you can go and buy it, is legal. Let's take a moment to process that. Here are some other examples of copyright violations. If I email a copy of an article I find, which I don't own and I don't have the right to redistribute or to copy to a friend or colleague, that also technically violates copyright. But once again, the legal alternative is I could send a link to where the original owner published that article or put it up online. Even downloading a friend's photograph from Facebook technically violates copyright because Facebook itself doesn't give copyrights, to everyone who's making copies. You can see already common sense and copyright clash. The ease of just taking things off the internet and pushing them places mechanically clashes with copyright's very strict, you can't redistribute unless I explicitly tell you. You can't download unless I explicitly tell you. One of the websites which used to do this quite well is a place called Flickr. It's a place where people can upload photos. And those photos you couldn't save onto your computer. If you tried to do so, it would actually stop you from doing so, saying this thing's under copyright. Technically, according to the strict definition of copyright, that's how the whole internet should look. Not being able to download anything unless explicit permission has been granted from the creator. Now, there is an out in academia. So if those people, and almost everyone has used shared articles with their students or colleagues and so forth. There is an out, and that's called fair use in America, or in South Africa, fair dealing. Now, fair dealing and fair use are intentionally fuzzy laws. They're laws which don't have very strict definitions, kind of by design. Broadly speaking, though, they follow a set of basic principles, which is instructors, people who educate, can use copywritten work without permission from the copyright owner for illustrative purposes. So if I am sitting in a lecture theatre and I am communicating with my students and I want to show them an excerpt from a journal article, I can put that up on my PowerPoint slide or whatever and show them that piece of work. Or I could show them a movie if I'm in, say, a film and media studies class. I would play 5 minutes from a movie and then have the class discuss it. Those are examples of fair use, specifically because they're for educational purposes. And of course, through all of these things, you always have to indicate the name of the author and the source, just as you would do standard academic referencing. That doesn't change. However, these definitions of fair use and fair dealing are based on non-profit, so this is non-project there, it's non-profit educational purposes. However, they are for use cases and not for redistribution. What I mean by that is that showing an excerpt from a journal article in a classroom is fine. Showing a brief video clip or playing a brief piece of audio or music for illustrative and educational purposes is fine. If I take that journal article or video clip and email it around to everyone in the class, that is not fine. Why is that not fine? Because I am redistributing that work and I'm copying that work. I'm not just showing it to people. Once again, I'm just going to reiterate. Copyright violations are ubiquitous and practically unavoidable. The basic practice of online anything, of the use of the internet, even just the use of digital technologies, agitates against copyright. It just makes copyright violations so easy. Now, also going back to fair use. Fair use, as I mentioned, is a deliberately fuzzy or gray law. There's no clear definitions of what constitutes fair use. You may see places that you can reproduce 10% of an article or 10% of a video clip. Those tend to come from American case law and apply to American institutions, but even there the law is fuzzy and variable. Broadly speaking, non-profit is the call. Now, I'm sure at least some of you are feeling a bit nervous, saying, well, I kind of do a lot of these processes all the time, and more or less, when I publish, I don't want to stop other people from using my work. I want to encourage sharing. There is an alternative to copyright, and that is Creative Commons. In fact, there's a broader thing called open licensing, but we're going to focus on one specific, the most broadly used set of systems, which is Creative Commons licensing. Now, Creative Commons is a legal system built on top of copyright. It doesn't replace copyright, and it's not in opposition to copyright. It's something built on top of, which makes explicit, using a little icon, what other people can use, in what ways other people can use your work. By which I mean it opens up some or all of the exclusive rights that copy, adapt, redistribute, publish, perform, etc. that I mentioned at the beginning, to users other than the original creator, depending on which sub-license you use. So all different licenses have different levels of permission, but at the core, they all have the same one, which is any user may redistribute or share the work and make copies of it. So if I license my photo of, let's say, the city of Cape Town under Creative Commons, it means anyone can take that picture and download a copy or email it to a friend and redistribute it without any kind of problem. Other licenses allow further rights on top of that, but all of them have that as the base. And once again, as per usual, you always have to attribute your source. Just like with academic plagiarism, always attribute your sources. So, don't have time to go into the depths of every single Creative Commons license, but broadly there are 6, which combine various clauses. What they all share is an attribution clause, that's number 2. The attribution meaning that if you reuse this piece of work, you have to say where it comes from. So if I were making a PowerPoint presentation and I found someone else's PowerPoint prepresentation and I thought, oh, this is valuable, I want to make some changes to this, I would have to attribute them as my original source. Which is why, if we go back to the very first slide, this presentation is from Thomas King and Shiham Sheikh, because Shiham Sheikh made the original presentation and she licensed it under this attribution-only license. That is how I have acknowledged my source in this particular piece of work. There are other clauses on top of that, so you can add a non-derivatives clause, meaning people can use the work, they can redistribute the work, but they can't change it. This can be very important, for instance, if I'm putting up a public health notice that I want people to reuse and reshare, but I want it to contain specifically the information that I included on that work and nothing else. An example could be if I'm using colors in a communicative way, like a red stop sign. If someone made a green stop sign, that could cause problems because green usually means go. So I release something and I say, I want this thing to be shared, I want people to go and take it, and I want people to use it, but I don't want them to change it because I assemble this thing in a very specific kind of way. Another clause you can add is a non-commercial license. Non-commercial meaning people can't profit off this, they can't sell this resource to further people. The non-commercial license clause is quite controversial for a number of reasons, which I don't have time to go into. In its very strict definition, it can also prevent people from, for instance, recouping printing costs. So if, say, a textbook was released under a non-commercial license, and someone wanted to print that book, but they wanted to get their $1 that they had to spend printing it back from users, the non-commercial clause might be interpreted to prevent them from doing that. So it is a bit of a controversial one, but as I said, we don't have time to go into the full length of details. And lastly, there's a share alike clause that I can add to the license, which means because I made this open, anyone who takes this and builds something from it has to themselves make their next thing open as well. It's called viral openness. I made my work open, so you must make any derivatives open as well. You'll see on the right-hand side here, you can mix and match these licenses to an extent. The top one being attribution only, or attribution and share alike, attribution and non-commercial, attribution and no derivatives, attribution non-commercial and share alike, or attribution, non-commercial, and no derivatives. So at the top, we have a very open license. What we're saying is to users, go forth, take this, make copies, distribute it to your friends, perform it, publish it, make money off it, change it. I don't care, so long as you attribute me as the original source. And right down the bottom here, we have something which says you can use it, you can share it, you can make copies, you have to attribute me. I don't want you to make any kind of money off this, and I don't want you to make any changes. And in between, we have various levels of strictness. I'm going to discuss the use case of some of these licenses right at the end. Just try to clear my throat. Now, how are these things being used? CC licenses, Creative Commons licenses, are actually already used extensively in the education and higher education sectors. They're used by open access publishing, so open access journals use Creative Commons licenses primarily. Open educational resources, which are pieces of teaching material which people or their creators want to be shared and reused, can be as granular as an explanatory video or as complicated as a full online course or a massive online open course, that's a MOOC, are using open licenses for those materials, and also for open data. Open data being the information that informs your findings, your machine readouts, your interviews, your surveys, your geographical data, your photographs, whatever constitutes data in your field. There's a strong push generally within academia in the open community to use two specific licenses, that is the Creative Commons Attribution Only, CC BY, and Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike, CC BY SA licenses, because these are the most open and encourage the most kinds of reuse and revisability and change over time. And of course, one of the biggest users of open licenses is the wiki suite of internet services, Wikipedia, Wikimedia, and so on. There's a whole range of different products in that family. They exclusively use CC BY and CC BY SA licenses, as well as items which are already in the public domain. So if you go to a Wikipedia article, all the pictures that they link to, or the videos they have, or the sound clips, are all licensed under CC BY SA, or public domain, which makes it a good place to go and find content for inclusion in your teaching materials, for example. A lot of people disparage Wikipedia and they say it's of low quality. That is very open to debate, but certainly if I need a place to find a good picture of a particular institution or a particular geographical region, Wikipedia and Wikimedia are really good places to start because they only use open licenses, which means you as a user can be confident that you are allowed to use these works and they're not under full copyright. Take a step back, and I want to just make one point very clear. Creative Commons does not eliminate copyright, okay? What it does is it sits on top of copyright and opens up specific parts of it. So, right back to the beginning of this slide, you'll notice I have licensed this under Creative Commons Attribution, meaning I am still the copyright holder of this piece of work. I created it. The copyright over this is mine. However, I'm very happy for people to go and use this, to share it, to make changes to it, to adapt it. If they can find a way to commercialize it, I'm happy with that. I don't mind, so long as they attribute me as the original source. I have not given up my copyright over this. What I have done is, for these exclusive rights, the right to reproduce, adapt, distribute, and sell, I have opened those up to the world. I have still not surrendered my copyright to the item. That might take a while to understand the complexities of, but the important point is copyright, the Creative Commons doesn't replace copyright. It's built on top of copyright, opening up parts of copyright to other people. Now, something which is very, very important, and one of the reasons why I advocate for open licenses is, as mentioned before many times, copyright violations are ubiquitous. They happen all the time. And as soon as you put something online, you have to assume that someone else is going to take it, download it, and do things with it. It's called the Barbra Streisand effect. Barbra Streisand was an actor in America. She asked for a picture of her house to be taken down off the internet. Within minutes, it was shared to tens of thousands of websites, because that's how the internet works. If people on the internet share information and don't want the information to be closed down, they don't want censorship, very anti-censorship crowd. Similarly, even if you put something up under full copyright, the law can't really protect you. People are going to go and download this. They are going to reuse it. And I'm sure you, like me, have done the same thing by accident. We don't know that, technically speaking, just downloading a picture off the internet counts as copyright violation. So even if you decide not to use any kind of open license, full copyright won't protect you. It really won't. I mean, of course, you can hire an expensive lawyer and go into litigation and so forth. But in terms of academic work, you really shouldn't be getting into situations where you're trying to get people not to read your work. So open licenses are a sensible way of actually dealing with how the internet functions mechanically, by saying, I understand people will share my work, go and do it with my blessing. Here's how to reference me when you go and you reuse my work in different kinds of ways. The important thing to recognize, though, is don't ever publish before you're clear on the following tips. So don't ever put something online before you are happy with the quality of the resource, that you're happy that it doesn't contain third-party copyright materials that you don't have permission to reuse, which generally means images or videos, and of course that it has passed the normal process of ethical review. Publishing online is publishing. You don't just stop your normal processes of being practical and safe online. You go through the normal standards of making sure what you're putting out there is high quality, it doesn't break the law, and it's ethical. And that doesn't change just because you are publishing openly. Now, the last bit of the presentation is going to talk about Figshare. Figshare being a platform that you can use to share your work openly and publicly with open licenses. It is one of many. It just happens to be one I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with other systems as well. Zenodo for one. But we're just going to focus on this because it's available to everyone. I'll show what I mean. Just to reiterate, open publishing is making public set of outputs emerging from your research or from your teaching or from your education or your data, so that other researchers, educators, and students can examine that work and to reuse it. It's sometimes divided into three categories. Open access, generally talking about classical academic outputs, books, chapters, conference papers, journal articles, and so forth. Open educational resources, generally talking about course materials, lecture notes, videos, and presentations used to educate. So this presentation here is an example of an open educational resource, as an OER. And open data, which is publishing the cleaned and de-identified data underpinning your research findings under an open license for other people to reuse, rework, critique, and so forth. People often just say open access, meaning all of these three things, and that's probably fine. The important part is they all follow the same basic principles of a willingness to share the work under certain conditions. What open publishing is not is automatically of lower quality. Open publishing can have exactly the same ethical review, quality assurance, etc., as closed journal publishing can have. It depends on the journal, depends how well it's written, how well it's run, how good the media and editorial boards are, and so forth. Plus, the Public Library of Science, for example, massive open publisher, very high quality, high ratings. Nevertheless, everything is openly licensed. So open publishing can be of lower quality. It is possible. You have some low quality open journals. You have some low quality closed journals. You don't change your publishing process just because you license your content in a different way. Open publishing is also not the same as social media type sharing. Putting my research paper on Facebook isn't publishing if it still hasn't gone through the normal processes of peer review, of ethical review, and so forth. So publishing still is a process, a defined process from beginning to end with protocols around quality, around ethics, and so forth. Open publishing isn't just putting things out there, or at least it shouldn't be. It's also likewise not making just anything available right from the beginning, regardless of quality or anonymity or ethics. That's simply just bad research, right? Open publishing doesn't have to be that. And very importantly, open publishing, whenever you start publishing things, you really should be putting out the information people need to understand what your data is, or what your research, where your research comes from, or what your piece of open educational resources are used for. Metadata, descriptive information, abstracts, and so forth, all of those apply equally well in open publishing as they do in closed publishing, traditional publishing. There are many different tools for open publishing. You can use, if you go through an open access journal, they use just the standard journal systems that are used by many others. A lot of them are affiliated to the Open Access Journal group, the OJ, Open Journal Systems, OJS, which is just a consortium which uses similar software to help people publish. You can take your journal article and just put it on a website somewhere. That's possible, it's doable, it's not optimal. It does fulfill the objectives of communicating it, but it's not the best way of doing it, because if your website ever goes down, then access to that material is lost. So there are several specific publishing platforms which expressly support open publishing, such as Zenodo, which is supported by CERN, the big research institute in Switzerland, and the one we'll be talking about is Figshare. These platforms offer generally a fairly standardized set of functions, including creation of digital object identifiers. It's a piece of code that follows an article or a piece of data or an educational resource around the internet, making it more findable. They provide backup and archiving services. They provide machine-readable licensing. So when I'm searching online for things which are specifically openly licensed, these places will alert Google or Bing or whatever browser you use that this thing is in fact open and it can be reused. And they provide search engine optimization features so that your work is more likely to appear than if you just put it on a website somewhere. They are also generally freemium models. Freemium meaning they are free, the basic functionality is free, but you can pay more for additional access and additional support. So for Figshare, Figshare is free to anyone. Anyone can go to Figshare and create an account. But they also provide more expensive paid options to journal publishers or to institutions, where you get more space, you get more support from the Figshare team, you can customize it a lot more. Basic freemium model, free to everyone, but paid for version has more functionality. Figshare takes anything, so it accepts all kinds of file types and visualizes a lot of them in the browser. So you can put your open educational resources there. You can put your open access articles up there. You can put your open data there. It doesn't mind, it doesn't discriminate. And you can always version your files. You can change the files after they've been put up by versioning. So if you have a data set which is constantly being updated, you can update your records to put the most recent version up there so people can see the most recent version of your data. It's got a horizontal or flat organizational structure, which means instead of going into Figshare and trying to find the Nigerian Open University resources, you'll simply search for whatever search terms you're looking for. Bioinformatics data or genomic expressions. So I'm not a geneticist myself, I don't know the lingo that well. I mentioned before, you can pay for specific advanced features in the software as a service model. UCT has done so. They've got a customized instance of Figshare called Ziva Hub. What Ziva Hub offers is a greater level of functionality and curation support for UCT co- or single-authored resources. So anyone who has access, the whole of H3A Bionet, because you have access through the UCT node, you can put your content up on Ziva Hub through the normal channels that you would publish, because UCT accepts anything that has a UCT affiliation. Ziva Hub's focus institutionally is on open data, but it can host other kinds of resources as well. But the real push to it is as an open data space. It is also a curated space, which means when you try and publish something to Ziva Hub, it goes through a review process beforehand. It has to pass certain checks. The Digital Library Services unit, the unit I used to be a part of, goes through the thing and makes sure that this does come from a UCT affiliated author. It has the correct metadata, it's described well, the author names are correct, it doesn't full of typos and so forth. And of course, it provides more space. I was going to do a quick demo of Ziva Hub. I don't think we'll have time because we started a bit late, but you're very welcome to go to zivahub.uct.ac.za and look at it. It is very similar to other forms of Figshare. Many institutions have their own Figshare accounts. Monash University in Australia uses it. A lot of UK institutions use it as their open data repositories. American institutions as well. Feel free to go in. All the data there is openly licensed, so you can go in, find information, download it, look at it, combine it with your own data, and so on and so forth. So I was like, we can't show you these examples because we're running out of time, but there are two examples there in the presentation you can go and look at for two examples of bad and good open data publishing, respectively. The first one being a dummy record, a fake version that I put up just to show you how not to do things when publishing online. You see it has, when you actually look at it, you'll see that it's completely incomprehensible. It's got no information telling you what this thing is, where it comes from, how you're supposed to use it to make sense of it. And also good press examples. Dr. Sumir Panji uploaded a resource last year in November, which has very rich metadata, it has clear authorship principles, it has good categories and keywords, making this thing findable and accessible, and it's linked to other pieces of work. So those are some examples of good and bad practice, respectively, for you to take a look at. Very quick summary before I hand back over to Babalo. Creative Commons licenses. Creative Commons licenses, or open licenses generally, allow researchers, academics, and students to share their work without the restrictions of full copyright, but still retaining copyright. They're still the owners of the work. Open publishing, regardless of where you publish in, is still publishing. It still needs to follow the same processes of ethical review, quality, peer review, etc., as any kind of academic publishing work. If you're not doing those processes, you are not publishing, you are just putting stuff out there. Right? Open publishing is no different. And as mentioned before, there are specific freemium platforms that are designed for open academic publishing, such as Figshare and Zenodo. Figshare can be used by anyone. Anyone can go right after this presentation and create their own account and upload their own content, or go through a more formal process such as an institutional account. And the last page is just for reference for you later about some of open publishing terminology. Right, I'm going to hand back to Pablo to answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Really appreciate your time. Oh, by the way, Thomas and I are next to each other. We had an issue with a laptop that we were using, so we had to share a computer. It's now open for, I just want to start by saying, Thomas King, thank you so much for taking time out to give this very interesting and informative talk on copyright, licensing, and open access. I feel like for me, it was a lot to learn. And I have a lot of questions, and I think for me personally, I'll ask the questions after I give you a chance to ask. So can I kindly ask the people that are attending the talk, and thank you so much as well for you attendees and participants for taking time out to listen to this very informative talk as well. This is time for questions, or rather comments. So if you have any questions, if there are any burning questions, raise your hand. How you can do that is at the top of the tab, there's a white human being looking thing, icon, raising its hand. So please press that, or you can tap in the chat room and I'll be able to read that question out loud for Thomas to answer. Alternatively, you can email him, because in the ad we provided his email address and other information as well that you could use. But for now, are there any burning questions that we have for Thomas? Are there any questions? Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for that. I think we might have had a bit of a break in our internet for some weird reason. Apologies for that. Are there any questions? I think 18 is trying to ask a question. 18, are you trying to ask a question? 18? Because I think he had raised his hand. If there are no questions, I'm going to give us 2 minutes. And if there isn't any questions, I'll ask. If there are no questions, I'll kindly ask that we contact Thomas directly ourselves. But for me, one of the things that hit me was once something is online, you've lost, in a way, the ability to control what people do with it. And I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. And I think I have to chew on it because, I mean, if I put a picture online, it doesn't mean that people can do whatever they want to do with it, but actually they can. So what does it mean legally? And if you don't have the finances to fight, but also who are you going to fight? So if, for instance, I put a picture up online or I put a journal and people abuse it, and thousands of them do that, how do you, because now the internet is a global tool, how do you manage that? I think for me, I'm going to, on the side, email him to have that debate and discussion. But otherwise...
Well, perhaps I can respond to that. It's a very legitimate fear, this concern. All I can tell you is that it's happened way before the internet was a thing. People were misrepresenting each other's work back in the 1700s. You can't stop people from being people. What the internet does and doesn't do is that it drastically increases the speed and ability for people to share and move your content around. Copyright does not protect you from that. Copyright is a pre-internet law. It's based on pre-internet principles and understandings. And even then, it was widely abused. It happens today. The US colonies in 17, whatever they were, a big thing about how they would not respect British copyright because for them it was too expensive and they just had to go and share the knowledge. But way before the internet was a thing, people were taking other people's words and using them in different ways. It's something you have to accept, and if you're producing really high quality materials, you're describing them well, people won't be abusing those in silly ways. People do respect quality, and the best defense is always quality. Put things out there, explain where they came from, explain how they should be used, explain how people can contact you, and actually, things generally tend to work out pretty much fine.
Well, I mean, for me, 2 words come to mind, plagiarism and piracy. I'm thinking in my institution where we currently are, if I take your words verbatim and use them, I do stand a chance of being fired, or if it's an assignment for school, I do stand a chance of getting 0% and going to tribunal. So there is perhaps in smaller institutions, or rather, because obviously then globally it's hard to control, but I think in local situations you could punish plagiarism and piracy.
Plagiarism certainly is a legitimate concern. Plagiarism was a concern before open licensing was a thing. Open licensing, in a sense, preempts that conversation by saying the work is out there and I want it to be reused. Still credit me as the original author, but we understand that you as a student are going to download this and make a copy on your personal computer. Yes, of course you are. You were doing that for copyright articles anyway, and that's perfectly fine. And when I engage with this, I've engaged with academics all the way from 25 to 65. And the 65-year-olds are just as surprised about this as 25-year-olds are, because they'd be doing exactly the same thing just for much longer. Emailing students their articles from Elsevier, or communicating, downloading copies from things they technically shouldn't be doing. Copyright violations are almost impossible not to do. Your computer makes temporary copies of files, and sometimes makes full copies of files that you find on the internet. That is technically copying files. You almost can't avoid violating copyright on the internet because it's a law which doesn't take into account the systems that the internet will provide. So while this may seem like a scary thing, I would say don't worry about it. Just be aware of it going forward. People will be using my work, and that's the point of publishing, is people use it. People will also be sharing that work. They'll be redistributing that work to colleagues. That is going to happen, whether it's under full copyright or not. So why not use an open license in which you explicitly understand this from the get-go and say, yes, absolutely, I want there to be a copy of my paper in every single student's hard drive. That's only going to increase my prestige as an academic, not decrease it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's a lot to chew on, actually. It's food for thought. And I think for me, I'm going to rewatch this once it's available online. And by the way, we're going to make it available on YouTube, on our YouTube site. It's HA Bayonet. And again, you can use the resource, but obviously making sure that you don't abuse it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending. And I just want to say special thank you to our guest speaker, Thomas King. We have learned a lot from you, and we appreciate your time and effort.
Always a pleasure.
For sure. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.